Here are a few of the people you'll be hearing from during the course of tonight's presentation. From the Department of Public Works, we have George Heiner, Julie Paluda, and also Lynn Berry. From HDR, in addition to myself, we have Ed Shea and Jessica Sneed. I'd like to go over some of the meeting logistics. Tonight's meeting is being hosted on Zoom, of course, and we're going to ask that you please mute yourself if you are not speaking, and to ensure optimal bandwidth, please turn your cameras off. We're going to be presenting quite a bit of information tonight, and we'll be stopping along the way to address questions. If you do have a question, we ask that you enter it into the chat box, and we will address them in the order in which they're received. You may also use the raise hand function if you would like to speak your questions verbally. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to share information about the Our Water program, and more specifically, changes to the petition process, which we'll go into detail a little bit later on. We've gotten some interest from the community about the program, and I do want to note that tonight's meeting is non-binding. We're not asking you to make any sort of decision or commit to anything tonight. Instead, this meeting is designed to help you learn more about the program and make an informed decision on whether connecting to public sewer is right for you and your community. Again, we're not here to obtain a commitment or to advocate for the program. This is ultimately the community's decision. And there is no active project in the works. Again, this is informational only. Here's an overview of the information we'll be discussing tonight. First, we'll discuss Our Water as it relates to Severn Grove. Then we'll discuss funding and costs, followed by the application and petition process. And then we'll open things up for next steps and an extended Q&A. And with that, I'll turn things over to George Heiner with the Department of Public Works. George.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks, Rakia. My name is George Heiner with Anne Arundel County Public Works. I'm in the Utility Design Division, and I'm going to be speaking at a couple different parts tonight. And at the beginning here, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of the program and why DPW has an interest in seeing septic systems connected. And then I'll also be talking a little later about the overall process and how it works. As Rakia mentioned, we have a lot of information to present, so we want to take as many questions and answer them as well as we can. So please feel free to put stuff in the chat box. We'll stop at a couple different places as we go through the presentation to get caught up on questions.
Enter followed by pound.
So what is the Our Water program? So the Our Water program is an integrated plan that the county has DPW has developed to improve the health of waterways in the Chesapeake Bay while strengthening our water resiliency. The program has 5 different elements to it. So one is called small system upgrades, and this is an effort where we're going to be looking at connecting or upgrading small privately run wastewater treatment plants to upgrade them to state-of-the-art treatment performance. Another element is our ongoing stormwater improvement program. This is managed by our Bureau of Watershed Protection and Restoration and funded by the stormwater fee. There's a groundwater resiliency component to the program. And then wastewater treatment enhancements. So we've invested quite a bit of money over the last 10 years with state support to upgrade our wastewater treatment plants, and they're performing very, very well right now. So we want to look to continue that in performance and see where we can improve it if that's possible. And the main part that we're here to talk about tonight is the septic to sewer connection program. So why are we interested in connecting septic systems? The main focus of this is really nitrogen removal from the wastewater stream. So traditional septic systems are not as effective at removing nitrogen pollution as our wastewater treatment plants. So there's basically comparing a septic tank effluent with or treatment plant effluent, there's a 90% reduction in the amount of nitrogen that's discharged in the waterway. Now there is treatment that goes on in the soil, right, in your leach field from your septic system. And that can be very effective for some pollutants, but it's not particularly effective for nitrogen. So most of this effort was really oriented around reducing nitrogen loads to the local waterways in the Chesapeake Bay ultimately. Can you go to the next slide? So the county has a very large number of septic systems, over 40,000 systems throughout the county. 13,000 are in what's called the critical area, which is areas that within 1,000 feet of a tidal waterway. It is a significant source of nitrogen in the county, and there are impacts in addition to the Chesapeake Bay, more broadly, impacts on our local rivers and waterways. So as the general public, what are the benefits to the general public? So as I mentioned, there's less nitrogen discharge to the Chesapeake Bay. This program, if we're able to connect more septic systems, will help us maintain compliance with our Chesapeake Bay nutrient loading goals. And there will also be fewer nutrients and other pollutants in our local waterways. So one thing I think a lot of people probably don't realize is all of the county's watersheds and the rivers are also listed as impaired for nutrients and other pollutants. So beyond just the Chesapeake Bay, the local waterways are also impaired. And there are some benefits for the homeowner in a septic connection. These can be very site specific. So some of the things here may not apply to your situation as a homeowner, but we're going to go over some of those possible benefits. A lot of times your septic system is, the size of your septic system is related to the size of your house. So there can be restrictions on what you can do in terms of building additions that are tied to your existing septic system. You also need to leave room in your yard for a drain field and usually a future drain field. And so that can take up space in your yard that you can't use for other purposes. There can be a positive impact on the home value. This is also very site specific though. So if that's something that is particularly motivating, we would suggest that you consult a realtor about possible property value impacts. Can you go to the next slide? For systems where you're on a private well, there's always a risk that there's of cross-contamination between the septic field and the well. This diagram's condensed everything so we can fit it all on, but usually the well is on one side of the house and the septic system is on the different side of the house to maintain that separation. If you're connected to the septic, if you're connected to the public sewer, obviously that reduces that potential contamination. There's also, as I mentioned earlier, improvements to nearby waterways because that septic tank effluent is not going to be going in, eventually making its way into your local waterway. And you do avoid the costs associated with maintaining septic systems. So if we go on to the next slide. So the main ongoing cost with the septic system is the pump out cost, which is a couple $100 every few years. And the more expensive work that sometimes needs to be done is when the drain field needs to be replaced. And so that drain field replacement can be between $5,000 and $20,000, depending on the circumstances of your lot. And in certain circumstances, you can be required to upgrade your system to a BAT system, but still the most costly component here is if you had to replace your drain field. The BAT system we're mentioning here is called the best available technology. And that's a that is a septic system that has been designed to promote nitrogen removal. So it's more complicated from a electrical and mechanical standpoint because it's designed to promote certain microbial growth that will remove nitrogen. So there's a larger O&M cost for that because they consume more energy and they require more maintenance. And the drain field cost is about the same if you replace it, because the drain field component of a traditional system or a BAT system is pretty much the same. Okay, next slide. So we had our overall need, which is to protect our waterways and improve the environment and water quality. We have developed this process to try to facilitate septic connections, and we'll go over some of the changes. And our goal with this program was to connect 6,000 septic systems over the next 30 years. So we're kind of targeting 200 homes a year. We have developed a procedure for neighborhoods to apply for consideration for a subsidy, and we'll talk about that in a lot more detail as we go further. So we'll provide just a little bit of background on the connection program, the septic to sewer connection program itself. Earlier, many years ago now, it's probably almost 10 years ago, 9 years ago, an earlier version of the Chesapeake Bay total maximum daily load was identifying nitrogen load reductions by sector. For Anne Arundel County in the septic sector, they were looking at, I believe it was 46% reduction in nitrogen. So that would have meant connection of close to 20,000 septic systems out of the 40,000 countywide. So we started at that time with a lot of conceptual planning to look at what areas might be possible, that might be close enough to the county's existing system to connect. We started a septic task force that met in 2017, 2018, and maybe into 2019 to get feedback. This was a task force of different people within the community, the business community, environmental representatives, and certain community representatives. And we asked them for ideas and guidance on policies, prioritization criteria, and funding approaches and outreach efforts. So that septic task force effort really helped us develop legislation that went before the council and was passed at the beginning, I guess about at the end, so it would be last year at this time, and then in the beginning of the current year. And the two major changes that we're going to talk a lot about were changes to the petition process. That one enables DPW to offer subsidy for certain projects, and the second is to allow a partial deferment of the annual assessment. We also have developed a procedure for reviewing applications so we can compare projects and decide which projects we want to try to provide a subsidy or sort of sponsor each year. So let's go to the next slide. We saw this graphic a little bit earlier. So what I wanted to just explain a little bit here is the areas in green are the county's planned service areas. The areas in blue are for the septic to sewer connection program. These are what we call the eligible areas. So to be an eligible area, you had to be in the critical area or in an on-site wastewater problem area, or you needed to be in an area that we had already developed a layout for as part of our previous concept plans. In this instance, Severn Grove is eligible because it's in the critical area. And the blue areas on here are the areas that are eligible for the subsidies and the partial deferments. And so this was part of the prioritization approach, was really to target these sort of the systems that are closer to the waterways. Okay, next slide. So in this, we have a map of the Severn Grove Improvement Association and sort of where it sits with respect to the rest of the county system. So the way a petition project works is that the residents petition DPW for extension of sewer to their location, their project area. So in this instance, the nearest existing sewer line is on Bestgate Road. So the petition area would need to start at Bestgate Road and go all the way back along Severn Grove Road to the community. So that's why we're saying here, okay, the Improvement Association is 80 homes, the total properties would be 146, and the vacant lots are those lots along the route, I think primarily, and there might be a few in the community, but I think they're more along the alignment. So there's some constraints. There's some flexibility with setting up a project area, but there's also constraints. And one of the key constraints is that we start from the county's existing system and we go back on a contiguous route into the area that's going to be served. So it means that if we were going to serve Severn Grove Improvement Association area, all of these other parcels that are shown would also be included in the project area as part of that petition. And we'll have time to answer, more questions as we go through the presentation tonight. Okay, so that's the section where we're going to talk about the background a little bit. I know I saw a few questions come in, so I guess, Rakia, do you want to?
Sure. The first question was about the potential area to be served, and more specifically, the resident wants to know, when you say the community, do you mean homes solely within the bounds of the Severn Grove Association or the wider neighborhood? This resident lives down Severn Grove Road and is not officially in the Grove.
So a project area does not have to be, it is not tied to any particular homeowner association. So it can be part of the association, or it can extend beyond it. I believe we had an earlier meeting with this general community that was a larger area. That I think included the Saltworks area to the west. So I hope I answered the question. So it doesn't have to be just the Improvement Association. It could be smaller than that, or it could be larger than that. The voting is going to be based on the homeowners in the project area. So, the homeowner association can be a good way for us to communicate with the residents in an area, but the voting is actually going to be based on the individual property owners.
All right. And then the next question was, will we address dry wells?
So I think the dry well is the term, and hopefully I'm not mistaken about this, when you don't have a drain field and it has to get hauled and pumped, I believe. And so that, I mean, I wasn't going to talk about it too much, but I mean, if you were on public sewer, then you wouldn't need the dry well anymore.
Okay. The next question is a site-specific one. It says the map appears to exclude a property at the end of Oak Drive, even though the property is in the Severn Grove Improvement Association. Is that correct? And how can the resident confirm who is in and who is out?
They exclude our property at the end of Oak Drive. Let me take a quick look at that. We would, I guess what I would say is we want to emphasize we don't actually have a project set up, right now. So if there's interest in the community and we want to, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but we could include an area in a project area. So, I mean, the area that we showed is really a potential area to serve. So I wouldn't get too worried if you're in or out, because it's still very, very preliminary at this point. So I guess I'm responding to the last part about how do you find out exactly who is in and who is out. There is no defined project area yet, so we wouldn't be able to say exactly who's in and who's out. But we do need to have a continuous line of properties on both sides of the road from Bestgate Road back out into the community.
Okay, the next question, I'm going to paraphrase a bit. The resident says that according to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, nutrients are the largest problem and current wastewater plants do not address that. Has something changed?
Yeah, there's been quite a few changes. So one of the things, when you pay into the Bay Restoration Fund, right now you'd be paying in as a septic system owner, but there's also a component that has gone towards funding investments on wastewater treatment plants. Actually, Ricky, do you want to go to that slide? I think it's in the back of the set. So we have upgraded all of our treatment plants over the last 10 years. And this chart, here it is. This shows actually the trend in our performance. The green bars are the total nitrogen discharges from our wastewater plants. And so as you can see, as the plants were retrofitted and we brought them all online, our nitrogen loads are down 50% from where they were 10 years ago. So there has been a lot of progress made on the wastewater treatment plant discharges as a result of, the local governments. It's not just Anne Arundel County, it's throughout the state, doing these improvements funded by the Bay Restoration Fund.
Okay, I'm going to address the next two questions before we move on to the funding and cost section. The resident wants to know if we can explain the different pipe types in the legend, and I will scroll back to that slide.
Okay, Ed, do you want to speak to this one where the different line types on the graph, on the drawing?
Sure. So the trunk sewer that would serve the Severn Grove community is represented in the green line. And that's what's connecting from Bestgate all the way through Severn Grove Road to the entrance to the community. And portions of the community would be served by low pressure sewer due to the topography. So those lines are represented by the orange color, kind of the orangey yellow. So you might have grinder pumps at those homes that discharge to those low pressure sewers. And then the green lines, like we said earlier, those are trunk sewers continuing into the neighborhood. The red lines would be from a short segment of force main. So that's another type of pressure sewer, a little bit higher pressure, that would be connected to a pump station.
All right,
Okay,
thanks.
so thanks. Yeah, thanks, Ed. So I realized I just forgot to introduce Ed. As Ed Shea is with HDR, and HDR has been helping us with all sorts of aspects of the program, including helping with some of these layouts and the costs. And actually, the next section, I was going to hand it off to Ed, so I got a little ahead of myself. Ed's going to go through the funding and the costs, and hopefully that'll explain. I know we had a question about that, and so we're going to go over that right now.
And just before you start, I see the resident, whose name is Janet, has her hand raised. Could you please unmute yourself and say your question?
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have a question anymore. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, great, Rakia. So we're on picking up at slide 20. The county has developed a new program to reduce the costs of connecting to sewer. So there's three basic cost elements that are illustrated here in the pie chart as well as the graphic. The project cost to construct the local sewers in the right of way is the largest portion of the cost. So that's shown in the dark blue area of the pie. And that's the sewer that's in the street that takes wastewater from your home to the wastewater plant, or as the county refers to it, water reclamation facility, the WRFs. Then we've got the on-site cost. That's the private portion. That includes abandoning the septic tank, constructing a sewer lateral, and we'll show that again in the next slide. Then the third piece is the capital facility connection charge, and that represents the county's investment in the WRF capacity to treat your wastewater. And that's a fixed charge that tends to increase each year, currently around $10,000. So the project costs on the on-site portion of the cost, rather the private side costs, illustrated here a little bit more closely, would be abandoning your septic system and the drain field. So that would involve pumping out the septic tank, or if you have a dry well, there are procedures for doing that properly. It would be done by a master plumber or a licensed disposal system contractor. There's also going to be new on-site piping to convey flow from your home to what we call the clean out. So the clean out is the picture there, the vertical pipe that would typically be installed at the property line, and that provides maintenance access for DPW. That connects immediately on the other side to the trunk sewer in the street. And then there may be other on-site costs related to installing a grinder pump if that applies. So we'll go to the next slide and we'll talk a little bit more about these project costs. So for each household, on the next slide, Rakia, you can kind of see where Severn Grove lines up in relation to other communities where we've estimated project costs. So Severn Grove is basically in the middle, maybe just a little bit above the typical community. These costs have a lot of factors that are listed here. Depends on the property sizes. In other words, how much sewer has to be constructed to get from one property to the next, all the way to the existing infrastructure. The depth of the sewer, if there's a pump station required. In this case, the very preliminary conceptual plans assume that one pump station would be constructed. And then there's going to be surface restoration. So the trunk sewer would usually be placed under the paved streets, and that would involve restoration of that surface after the sewer is installed. So repairing the asphalt roadway.
Are there actual figures associated with these diagrams you're talking about? Because I'm dialed in and can't see anything.
Yes, there are. And so when you are able to access these slides on the website, you'll be able to see the graphics that accompany this description. Okay, going to the next slide. A look at the on-site costs that we've seen historically. There have been a number of projects over the past 5 to 10 years where homeowners have connected to public sewer. And the range of costs, it's usually between, these 3 bars that go up the highest here, between $2,000 and $8,000 per property. So this is the on-site portion of abandoning your septic tank, installing a sewer lateral that connects to the trunk sewer. So this is what you could usually expect. In some cases, if your home is set back further from the road or the right-of-way, you might have a little bit higher costs, but in most cases, you could expect this to be less than $10,000. So we'll pause there and take any additional questions we have in the chat box.
There is one question, Ed, about where the pump station would be located.
So this, of course, depends on the actual project area that would be defined. And so as George described, we don't have a preconceived project area. But hypothetically, based on the area that we showed you in the map, in the preliminary conceptual planning, the pump station might be located closer to the back of the community in the creek. So that's what you typically expect, that the pump station will be located in a lower lying area because you're pumping the flow back up to get over a ridge towards the Severn Grove Road where the sewer would ultimately go.
All right, a couple questions. Go ahead.
And I'll just add on to that. Typically, we'd be looking for a site that might be a vacant parcel or a county-owned area of land, if possible.
Right, or something owned by the community association, if that's possible. Yeah.
All right, a couple questions to confirm. So the farther from the main road, the higher the cost to convert?
Well, for each home in the community, the per property, or what we like to say per EDU, equivalent dwelling unit cost, for each home that's in the project area is going to be the same. But overall, the project costs would be expected to be a little bit higher if it's, if it extends further from the main road, or in this case, Severn Grove Road, just because it's more sewer that has to be constructed to get there.
I think
but that wouldn't affect one home more than another. Go ahead, George.
The question might have been oriented towards the private side costs. So if the question was about your private side costs, then yes, the further you are from the main road, it's more likely that it's going to be a little more costly. What's going to dictate that is really where your septic system is, because your current system would be set up to drain into your septic tank and then your drain field. So, if the house is set back from the road and let's say your septic system is behind your house, then that becomes more costly. So it really depends on exactly how things are oriented. But generally, I would say the farther away the house is, the more costly the private side cost would be.
And George, maybe we could roll into the discussion of grinder pumps, since the next couple of questions allude to that.
Yeah.
As far as the county's role.
Right. So, for the grinder pumps, and I'm trying to get caught up on the questions. Okay, so if your house was like significantly downslope from the main road, you might have to have what's called an ejector pump at your premises. So that's like a sewage handling pump, and it would pump up to the main road where there would be another county pump called the grinder pump. And we will show a picture. I know we have folks that probably want to get through some more of the cost discussion. So we have some slides about what that grinder pump looks like a little bit further in the presentation. Oops, now I don't see it. So we will, while we're talking, we'll get a picture together for you. But you would basically have that ejector pump would then pump up to the grinder pump, and the grinder pump would be at the basically the boundary between the public right of way and the property line. So you wouldn't necessarily be your own pump station. That ejector pump would be your own pump, but it wouldn't be like a little pumping station. There's a question on the pump station. Would it be big? So the pumping station would not be particularly large. We have a general footprint. We have that slide with the deck today.
I'll scroll through it, yeah.
Okay. They're not too noisy. They'll have generators that would typically go, they are tested once a week. So that's probably the noisiest piece of it. And the aesthetics we would be working on to come up with a way to make it kind of blend in best with the community. So who restores the private roads? So I forgot to look this up, are all of the roads in the community, we would restore any damage we do to the roads, let me put it that way. In most cases for a sewer line, we would probably pave half of a roadway because there'd be some disruption during construction, and if we're digging a trench, so we would patch and repair, that the side of the roadway where the work was, or the travel lane where the work was done. So
Ricky, I
with
could pull up a grinder pump slide if that's helpful.
Yeah, we can show it a little later, but it would be good to have it so we can show it later in the presentation. So would the property owner only be responsible for the private costs or the cost for the entire project? So we'll talk about that a little bit more, but the private owner is responsible for what we're calling the private side costs. The public side costs are going to be reimbursed to the county through the annual assessment. And we're going to talk more about that in the next section. So I think we're caught up. So Ed, why don't are you talking in the next section?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about how the public side of the project is reimbursed, and that will also talk about some of the funding that may be available for private side work.
Okay, thanks, George. So as we discussed earlier, the Septic Task Force initiated legislation to allow a subsidy for a percentage of the project costs. And again, that's the public side cost to construct the sewer. The state has a fund that homeowners pay into now. So the Bay Restoration Fund, administered by MDE, they have grants that can be used to offset the on-site costs or offset the CFCC. And the county is working with the state to also help offset some of the assessment costs, the annual assessment. Further, the county is looking for ways to take advantage of state revolving fund loans, which are very low interest rate loans, as well as other low interest rate loan opportunities. So the remaining costs are passed to the homeowner through the annual assessment. And we'll talk about that a little bit more on the upcoming slides, as well as the project subsidy. The subsidy terms were established in the county's legislation. So they're awarded based on the project ranking system, the available funding. Different amounts are available based on household income. So for households with income less than 300,000, the county allows up to a 25% subsidy, 25% of the per property cost. For households with income greater than 300,000, it's a half subsidy. So that's 12.5%. And this is used to reduce the annual assessment. So this is the new feature that was developed with the legislation to make connection more affordable. This slide describes the current Bay Restoration Fund grant arrangement with county residents. So there's assistance with the private on-site costs or the CFCC. And the funding may be available after the sewer main is extended. So after the trunk sewer is constructed and the homeowner begins to take on that cost of connecting to the public sewer, that's when the grant fund becomes available to the homeowner, and it's administered through the health department. So the funding is not directly provided to the homeowner. The payment is actually made to your contractor that you've hired, the licensed master plumber. And that would be your responsibility to identify and hire that contractor. The overall, the funding for this grant program could be up to $20,000. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. So this explains how the project costs are turned into the assessment, starting with the construction costs that are, these are first estimated from the engineering study. And once the project is built, all of the different cost elements are added up, the design costs, any easements that are needed to be acquired, construction inspections, overhead, that makes up the project cost. And that's turned into the net assessable amount. So this would subtract out the subsidy that's available, the state grant, county interest to finance the cost over the term of the, I guess, the financing period, which we'll get into in a moment here. That is what gets turned into the annual assessment. So the net assessable amount divided by the number of households that are in the project area. This is financed over a 40-year term. So that's increased from the previous 30-year term that was offered by the county. And this is again part of the legislation that increased it to 40 years. Currently, assuming that the county can get $5,000 from the state, so out of that $20,000 that's available in the state's BRF grant, 5,000 of it we're planning to be used to lower the annual assessment. The other 15,000 would be used, as it says here, for the on-site costs and the CFCC. So the objective is to eliminate the upfront costs for most households. Those on-site costs would be funded through the BRF, and then the focus would be on paying the annual assessments. Again, for households greater than $300,000 a year income, only half of the county subsidies available. And so that's, and also with the BRF funding, it's $7,500 instead of $15,000 for those on-site costs. There's an option to defer up to 50% of costs for everybody, no matter household income. And we've got an example on the upcoming slides of how that works. There's also, for households that qualify for elderly and low income or permanently disabled, there's an option to defer 100% of costs. For vacant lots, these features of the program are not available. There's no subsidy, there's no deferment of costs, and there's no BRF grant funding available. And this is significant because there are many vacant lots in Severn Grove. By our estimate, as many as close to half of the lots are vacant lots.
Before we go on to the next slide, I wanted to address a few of these questions here. Does the county provide assistance with arranging the grants, or does each homeowner manage them?
Yes, the county is working with MDE currently on the grants, and that's a program that the county applies to each year and is administered through the health department. So
All right.
once the project gets to that point where we're under construction, there would be communication about how homeowners would access that funding and participate in the program.
Okay, and does each homeowner need a building permit?
Related to the, go ahead, George.
Oh, I was gonna say, so each homeowner would need a plumbing permit to make the connection for the sewer line. You wouldn't necessarily need a building permit. And then let's see, if the sewer passes through a protected forest, is the protection waived to clear for the line? So that would be no, we wouldn't have a waiver. Or does the homeowner have to dig up their driveway? So in that instance, it would be likely you would have to go down your driveway. And that is one of the factors that affects the on-site costs. But we wouldn't have any special waiver associated with this project in order to be able to put in the sewer connection.
Okay, the next question has to do with resurfacing after, if this project were to move forward and the line was installed. Would resurfacing be done so that everything is even in color?
So we would not normally do that. Normally we would patch it and it would look visually, it would look different. It's certainly in the near term years and sometimes a bit longer. One of the things, as a petition project, the residents are reimbursing the county for the cost of the project. So if the entire road was resurfaced, that cost would end up kind of coming back to the community through the assessment process. So when we're normally doing them, we don't pave the entire area. We really focus on trying to just patch and repair the parts that are dug up as part of the construction work. Let's see. So there's a comment about the size, that some of the vacant lots, some of the lots are very small and they're not buildable. That is something if this area was interested, we would have to look at that more closely. There's definitely some lots would have to merge if the house covers existing parcels. And we would also have to look at this issue of what we would do with the lots that are smaller. So that's an excellent question. We haven't had to actually figure all that out yet. It's in the voting process, it's usually one vote per lot, but in this instance, not every lot is going to be buildable. So I think we would need to sort through what looks like the number of either buildable lots or existing lots, and then set up the voting process accordingly. So in terms of this particular neighborhood, that would be something we'd have to be talking with planning and zoning about as well. But that's an excellent question.
So I'm going to suggest that we move ahead a bit more with the cost information and then defer some of these questions a little bit later.
Okay.
Okay, so this slide helps to see what you could expect in terms of annual assessments. And that's related to the public side costs. And there are a couple components to what's shown in these bars in each scenario. These include the sewer usage charge. So typically on average, you could expect about $420 a year, which are billed quarterly based on your actual usage in flow rates. And that's included here. So if you took the subsidy in that first bar, you could expect to pay between $1,750 and $2,800 per year, including both the assessment and the sewer usage. If you were to defer 50% of the assessment, the cost might be closer to $1,500 a year. And then for households that were eligible for the 100% deferment, you're just paying the sewer usage charges each year. So that's why that blue bar is only about $420 per year. For households with higher income, you can see those three scenarios on the right. That's why the bars are higher, because they're qualifying for just the half subsidy or half of the BRF grant. So that's a higher annual assessment. The next slide summarizes everything we just talked about. So the homeowner private costs, these are the three major elements we discussed: the private cost, the capital facility connection charge, and the annual assessment. The homeowner private costs are incurred, 100% of these costs are incurred at the connection to the sewer. And this is primarily going to be addressed through the Bay Restoration Fund grants. So the aim is to have no upfront costs for most households, unless you have a really unusual lot with higher than normal, much higher than normal on-site costs. This would be covered with the help of the Bay Restoration Fund grants. The capital facility connection charge also should be covered with the Bay Restoration Fund grants. But you do have a choice to finance that cost over 40 years. And then finally, the assessment, the annual assessment is paid over 40 years, and you have the ability to defer up to 50% of that cost. And then the balance would be due at the sale of your home or at the end of the 40 years. I'm going to hand it off to Julie, who is going to explain the deferment with an example.
Hi, Ed. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm Julie Paluta, and I'm the Manager of Financial Services for the Department of Public Works. The partial deferral of up to 50% of the per property assessment in the capital facility connection charge is available to all owners of residential property with existing improvements. Homeowners can choose how much of the cost they would like to defer, up to 50%. For example, or as in this example, if the property is assessed up to $70,000, so over 40 years, up to $35,000 of the assessment cost can be deferred until the property is sold or transferred, whichever occurs first. This would bring your annual assessment payment down from $1,750 per year to $875. If the property is sold before the 40-year assessment period is over, you'd need to repay the deferred $35,000, and the remaining $875 per year annual assessment would be transferred to the buyer. Okay, the next slide. This is the full deferral repayment option. The full deferral payments is eligible for disabled and elderly residents who meet certain eligibility requirements as defined in County Code 13-5-815. And I saw this as a question in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and define what elderly or elderly is. So per code, exemption for elderly or disabled is any single family dwelling owned and occupied by any person 60 years of age or older with a combined gross income that is less than the maximum income level, or a surviving spouse with a combined gross income that is less than the maximum income level, or a person receiving disability benefits as a result of a finding of permanent or total disability under the Social Security Act, United States Civil Service Commission, Veterans Administration, or the Railroad Retirement Act, shall be exempt from user connection charges, capital facility connection charges, capital facility assessment charges, and front foot assessment charges until the sale or transfer of the property. So I just wanted to answer that question for everybody. So the full deferral defers each annual assessment, $1,750 until the property is sold or otherwise transferred. So you'll pay nothing until the property is sold or transferred. At the time of transfer, all of the deferred payments, which again is $1,750 per year in this example, are due. So for example, if you've been deferring for 10 years, you would have to pay $17,500 at the time of transfer. The remaining annual assessments would be paid by the new owner for the remaining years. So in this example, 30 years of assessments, or $52,500, would be paid by the new by the buyer. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a side-by-side comparison of the two deferral options, using again the $70,000 total assessment. For the partial deferral, $35,000 would be due at the time of property transfer, regardless of the number of years. Additionally, you would have been paying $875 per year, which is half of the yearly assessment by the number of years you've owned your home that you've been paying the assessment. In the case of the full deferral, the required payment at the time of the property transfer depends on what year you transferred the property. So if you transferred after 5 years of the assessment, $8,750 is due. After 10 years, $17,500. After 15, $26,250, and after 20, $35,000 is due. And that wraps up the deferment options. Thank you.
Julie, did you talk about how the, I noticed there's a question about whether someone that defers pays interest on the deferment. Did you explain how that 40-year annual total is derived?
How the 40-year annual, it is calculated every January. It's the same payment every year. And it is assessed, it's due every January.
So that interest that is paid is the interest that the county pays to finance the project at the very beginning.
Yes. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. How is it calculated? Yes, that is.
Yes.
Yes.
I think the question was, if I defer 50%, am I paying interest on that piece that's deferred? And that I think the answer is no to that.
No.
It's the total project cost, including financing, is determined, and then it's split up into 40 segments.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, it is.
Okay.
You are paying interest for the project at the it's calculated at the beginning, and then it's amortized over 40 years.
Okay, so let's go to our next break, and which is after this slide, and let's get caught up on questions, because I see we have a lot of questions in the box. And before we talk about the applications and petition process, let's go through these. So there's one that is basically talking about how all the small lots would somebody have to pay for all the small lots. So I think we would, again, what I was trying to describe is that in this particular neighborhood, because of all these small lots, we have to be talking to probably the OPZ on our side once we have a set project area to figure out what number of actual lots could be built on, and figure out how that translates into our voting process. So this one would be a little more tricky for, I guess, on our side administratively. But I wouldn't be my expectation that every one of those tiny lots would be provided with a connection. Because that's probably not going to be buildable from that standpoint. We had a question: do owners of vacant lots, would they never be allowed to hook up to sewer and never develop previously undeveloped lots? So if you were a vacant, the intent of the program overall is to reduce nitrogen loads from existing septic systems. Okay, so the subsidy and the deferment are oriented around existing residences. That's why there's a difference. That's why the subsidy and deferment aren't available for vacant lots. But it doesn't mean you couldn't build on that lot, once sewer has been put through the area, and we would put a connection in front of the vacant lot. It just means that particular lot would not be eligible for a partial deferment on the assessment, and it would not be eligible for a subsidy. So a question about the landscaping, and essentially the private side work is going to be the responsibility of the homeowner. So any landscaping that's disturbed sort of on the private owner's side would be the responsibility of the homeowner to have fixed. On the public side, we would have, our contractor would restore areas that they disturb up to wherever the grinder pump or the clean out is. And we would try to restore it to a pre-existing condition. If any owners on a private road refuse to grant the easement, what would happen? So we have to have an easement to access the infrastructure that we put in. So in the instance where it's a private road, it's really going to depend on how that easement would be granted to the county, right? If for example, there were 20 houses and every one of them had to be unanimous to grant an easement, and one person didn't want to grant the easement, I think that would stop the work, because at that point, we wouldn't be started at that point. That would stop the project because we wouldn't have access to our infrastructure. So it depends really on what that kind of joint ownership of the roadway looks like. And there's a question about what means interested, 100%, 50%. We're going to talk from the perspective of the petition process, what is needed to go forward. We're going to talk about that in the next section. But I would bring that back to what is relevant to, if you have shared ownership of a roadway in your community, it's whatever governs that is going to dictate the easement portion of it. We did get some questions from the Severn Grove Improvement Association, and we will go over those when we wrap up the next section. And they were, let me see if I can get caught up here. There's a question about if you had a situation where everyone along a road wanted to do the project except a few properties at the very end, could they be excluded? So that is actually something that can happen. It's good to you want to communicate with everybody to figure out where there's interest, because we're going to build from our existing infrastructure out. So there's some flexibility on where the project area ends, but we don't jump over properties on our way to our existing system. So I think I got a little long-winded there, but the short answer is yes, you can modify where the project ends. Let's see. How do you define elderly low income? I think that's been addressed. And if a homeowner sells their home during the 40-year deferment, is the new owner responsible for the balance of the assessment? Yes, Julie, I want to make sure I answer that one correct, but yet the new owner takes over the assessment at that point.
That is
Once
correct.
the home is sold. Okay. There's a question about what is the break even for a sewer versus a BAT system, and I'm not comfortable answering that right now. I think it's more complicated because there is a usage cost for being on the public sewer. So I'm not sure it's quite as straightforward as the question, and I'd like to kind of defer on answering that one. And interest on the deferred amount, we answered that. The next buyer has to pay, we answered that.
Yep. George,
Yes.
just to add on to that, the only time that is not applicable is when the seller does obviously pay off the entire deferment. Then it wouldn't transfer, and sometimes that is negotiated in the sale.
I think there's a question. Can we go back? There's a question about one of the numbers on the slide. Why is 140,000 being paid when the cost is only 70,000?
140.
Let's see.
Which slide, George?
I'm not sure. I'm trying to figure out which slide. I'm not sure which. In column, I think if we'll have to look at this, because if there's an error, we'll need to correct it. But right now. I'm not sure which slide the question is referring to. So let's kind of keep moving, I guess. What is due every January? I think, Julie, you were saying that the assessment bill is sent out in January.
That's correct. The assessment bill.
Okay, a comment about will sewer make some previously undevelopable lots able to be developed? I think that's a possibility. Yeah, it depends on why the lot is not buildable. Okay, if it's not buildable because it's too small, that's not a septic system issue. If it's not built on because it's not passing the percolation tests, that is something that public sewer would alleviate. So, oh, okay. I see. We had a clarification. The deferment payback slide. Okay, so the question was, shows 35,000 at 5, 10, 20 years. Okay, what we're trying to show, I see now. What we're trying to show on this slide is there's an amount you need to pay back at the time that the property is transferred. And in in this example, if your total assessment was $70,000 and you chose to do the 50% partial deferment, that means 35,000 of that 70,000 is your partial deferment. Okay. Whenever you sell that house, you have to pay back that $35,000, whether it is at 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. So it's not additive. What we're trying to show here is that regardless of when you sell the house, you're paying that. If you deferred 50%, you would be paying that $35,000. The other deferral works in a different way, and your deferment is really what you're not paying annually. So the intent of this slide was just to give you a better understanding of the two different deferments and how they work and what you'd be required to pay back at each time. And I see a comment about the lot sizes. Again, that is something we would need to really look more closely at here, because these lots are not all going to be buildable. And so how we would sort through that is something we'd have to work on. Okay, I think we're caught up. So we'll go to the next section, which talks about our application and petition process. So as Ed mentioned, and I think I mentioned earlier, there's always been a petition process for residents that are on private water or on septic systems to request extension of water or sewer to their communities. And this new septic to sewer connection program really hasn't changed the petition process. It's the petition process financing was changed a little bit, and that's what we just talked about. And we've added an application process to the front of that petition process because we wouldn't really be able to offer a subsidy to every possible community. So there's an application process that we've developed, and that's what we're going to step through really quickly, how the application process and then how the petition process works. So the application process is non-binding, and it's really a way for us to gauge whether there's interest in the community and provide more information to everybody about how the process works. So the first part of the process is where we are now. We're at the beginning of the beginning. So we've received some interest in the area, and we're doing a public information meeting just to explain how the program works. If there is interest, we would look for an application to be submitted, and we'll have a slide coming up in a little while that talks about what that looks like. And it's not particularly rigorous, so the application is used to just help us compare different communities against one another and decide where we should offer a subsidy. And then after that, we would do additional review, because right now we've presented very, very broad conceptual costs. So once we have an application, it'll define a project area so we can refine our costs a little bit. And we would do another public information meeting just like this one, but with a little more site-specific information, and would only include the people in the application area. And that was really step 2. In step 3, the community would be deciding that they want to start the formal petition process. And at that point, there's forms that have to be signed by everybody in the project area that indicates you're interested, at least in looking at the, having the petition started. And once we have the majority in an area, so that's 50% plus 1. Actually, those forms go to Julie's group, and then they would come over to my group in utility design, and we would do an engineering study for that. We would then have updated costs, and we would have a public hearing to present those costs. There's then a vote, a ballot that would go out to decide whether to proceed with the project or not. And if the majority are in favor, the project would go to final design and construction, and then it would be built, and residents would have to connect after that. So one thing that's very important to understand on the process is that within the project area, once the work is complete, everybody has to connect. So the 51% can make the 49% connect. So it's important that everybody understands that. So let's take a look. The next slide has a little more detail on once you're in the formal petition process. So I guess I'd emphasize nothing, Ricky said this at the beginning, nothing we're talking about today has been binding, and we're not asking for any votes about anything. The part of the process that is binding is when you are starting the formal petition process. So the community files a petition. So everyone will be notified that there's a petition that's been under consideration by the neighborhood or the community. If the majority are interested in DPW doing that engineering study, we'll do the engineering study. We'll schedule a public hearing. At the public hearing, we'll go through the construction estimate. Some of the questions everybody's asking tonight, like where would the pumping station go? Which houses would be on grinder pumps, which houses would be on sewer. Those would be things that we'd be able to address in more detail at that time, because the preliminary engineering is basically 30% design effort. So at that point, we have a specific area that we're examining, and we're starting to develop the key design concepts there. So in step 3, we do the public hearing. Also, at that time, we'll go over what the costs are expected to be and what the assessment is supposed to be based on those construction costs. Then the ballots would be sent out, and there'll be a time frame on returning the ballots. And if you don't vote, your vote's counted as a no. So in order to be yes, it has to be an affirmative yes. So in step 5, we'll count the ballot results. Want to go to the next slide. If the community votes in favor, then we would move forward for their final design. That means we'll do our plans and specifications. We'll advertise the project for construction. We'll hire the contractor. We'll do the construction. When the work is complete, a letter will be sent to everybody in the project area that says the work is done and ready to be connected to. And at that time, the residents have 9 months to connect. And the assessments usually begin the next calendar year after the projects are complete. One thing I want to mention too is when we do the ballot, the assessment on the ballot is based on our estimate at that time in the project. The final assessment is based on the final project costs. If there is a significant cost increase, there's a provision now in the code that if our construction cost is low, or the project cost is low, the community has a chance, to reconsider. But generally, as long as the project costs are below what we think they're going to be at the time when we do the public hearing, we just continue on with the project. And then the final assessment is based on the total project cost at the end. So the next step, let's just go over the next steps, and then I think we have a couple more questions, and then we'll get caught up. So the next step, if there was further interest, would be for I thought the next one was about the application. Sorry, I got myself off track. So let me back up. I jumped ahead of myself. So we've set up a community page on the ourwater.org website where we're going to post the slides from tonight's meeting, a recording of tonight's meeting will be on there in about a week. We'll also put some other information, some of the notes we've been taking. We'll put some pictures of grinder pump system, since we've talked about that a little bit and we didn't have it in our slide deck. You can go to that. There's a link that's on the slides right now. Maybe Ricky, if you can put the link in the chat box too. This should take you, to what we're calling the community webpage. And on that page, you can, as I mentioned, there'll be information related to the presentation tonight, but you can also say on there whether you're interested or you're not interested, and you can leave a comment as well. And the next step, so let's go to the next slide, which would be to turn in an application. So the application, as I mentioned, it's not particularly rigorous. What we just are trying to do is define a potential project area. So we'd be looking for a community name, a contact person, and a project area map. And we can work with whoever the contact person is to help develop the map. And once the community is interested in the application, we can send a link to the representative and they can submit the application. We'll take that and review it and rank it against other projects that have submitted applications. So if you go on the next slide, we developed a process for comparing different communities. So some of the things that we're looking at are the total pounds of nitrogen that we think would be removed by the project, how many properties are in the critical area, whether the properties are in what's known as on-site wastewater management problem areas, and then different cost metrics. So we'll be kind of using this to compare certain projects against one another. And the applications, we're gonna, as I mentioned earlier, we're really looking at a long-term program. So, we'll be repeating this process, and we're gonna have applications be valid for several years so that people don't have to keep repeating them. So that would really be the next step, is if there's more interest in the community, that we get an application that kind of defines where the boundaries of the project might be, and you can reach out to our team with help kind of making that map. So to someone who's wanted to clarify, the community means homeowners across the legal community entities. Yes. When I'm saying community, I'm meaning the project area. So it could be larger or smaller than the defined community. So Julie, we had a question about if an owner's income level goes down or the person becomes disabled during the payment period. Do you know the answer to that one?
No, I don't. I'd have to look into that. Is the answer, or the rest of the question, would they then be eligible for the for the 100% deferral?
I believe that's the intent of the question, yes.
Okay. I don't know the answer to that. If they've already taken the 50% deferral at that point, or if if they have the just the straight assessment I guess at that point. So I would have to get back to you on that. I'm not sure if
Okay.
they can, halfway through the assessment, if they can change that. That's the first time someone's asked me that, so I'll find out.
Okay. Okay. And the last thing, we did have some questions from the Improvement Association, so I just wanted to run through those real quick with the team. So the first question was really related to the lots and what's the minimum lot size, and whether any houses that were built would only be single family houses. So this area is zoned R1, which is one dwelling per 40,000 square feet. There's nothing in the extension of sewer, there's nothing inherent in that that changes the zoning of the neighborhood that's observed. So it would remain, whatever that current zoning is. We've talked a bit tonight about the tiny lots, and that, again, that was something that we would have to do a little bit more research on, how many lots would really be eligible, I guess, as buildable in this neighborhood. There is a question about whether every homeowner on a road where the project area is would have to connect, and that answer is yes. I mean, if you're in the project area, you do have to connect. A question about how would disturbed landscaping be handled, and I think we've talked about that with some earlier answers this evening. There was a question about what is the minimum sewer easement width, and that answer is that it's 15 feet. It's essentially, we need enough room to have an excavator sit over top of the line and have somebody standing nearby, right? So that's really what governs the width of the easement. If it's a very deep line, which I don't think this area would have very deep lines, but sometimes we widen that easement, but that's really because the wider the excavating equipment is, the wider the easement has to be. And one question also was, is there laws that force the property owners to incur the debt if they cannot afford this project? So I guess the answer to that is the procedure we've outlined tonight is in accordance with the county code. So, I mean, that's where the requirement to connect is also coming from. So I guess that answer is, are there laws for that? Yes. I mean, that is the process is described in the county code. And I think those were most of the questions that we got from the Improvement Association that we didn't already cover this evening. So I think so. Someone was just asking when would we, if we wanted to talk about lot specific questions. I would say the first step would be this application, just to see how much interest there might be in the community. And, as we were move forward with a particular project, we would start looking into those. So I'm not sure right now would be the appropriate time, because we don't know whether there's broader interest in the community. But if there was, and we started looking at it, then we would start. That would be probably the best time. So I see some people are trying to get to the link, but it doesn't seem to be working. Do you see those comments, Rakia?
I do. I've tried the link and it worked for me.
Okay. Do you know which browser you're using, by the way?
I've tried it in Edge and also Chrome.
Okay. Okay. So, so there was a question about if it's currently a buildable lot, and it is large enough to be buildable in the future, but is not built at this time, does the hookup to the sewer have to be done now or only when the building starts? Okay, so we would put a lateral from the main line to the edge of the public right of way and provide a connection. So let's say it was a gravity line, we would put a clean out in front of that vacant lot. but there's no building there, so nobody has to hook up to anything. We would put that in because it's more cost efficient for us to do that at that time. And it actually creates a little more integrity in the line itself because you don't have to dig down and cut it up later, right, to add a new connection. So we would put it in, but there's no requirement to connect because there's no building at that time. But that lot owner would not get, because they're a vacant lot, they wouldn't get a subsidy, and they wouldn't be offered would not be offered a subsidy when the partial deferment would not be available. A question about what did I mean with the 15 feet is the easement has a certain width, and the purpose of the public, the easement for the county is to be able to have a crew actually access the pipe in the ground. So what I meant was that a typical excavator, and everybody's seen them around, I mean, they can be 10 to 12 feet across the backside. So if you're going to position that type of equipment over top of the line, let's say you're digging up the line, that's really where the 15 feet is coming from. We need to have enough room, DPW's crews, to sit that equipment on an area that they have a legal right to be on, plus have a little bit of room for somebody to stand nearby. Yes, and somebody's saying, am I really trying to say if the lot is buildable, you must pay a full assessment if it's vacant? Yeah, I think that's a probably simpler way to say it. Yes.
So if it's a 50% or 51% majority that has to approve moving forward, if you're on a private road and you don't give an easement, how does that work?
Sorry, I put myself on mute. I think that would probably stop the project because we wouldn't be able to access the infrastructure. Would we cut down a large cedar tree that's less than 15 feet from the street? I mean, that's really site specific. I think we would need to take a look at what other the circumstances are there. We're not looking to cut any trees down that we don't need to cut down as part of any project, honestly. So we would, if there's a particularly significant tree in an area, we would probably, see what we can do to avoid it. Okay, well, so that's all the slides we had for tonight. We appreciate everybody sticking with us. I know it's been a long meeting and a lot of information. So I'm going to ask our team to stay on the line for a little longer, and we can take a few more questions, but we really don't have any thing left from a formal presentation tonight.
George, it looks like one more question popped up regarding cleanouts brought to an empty lot.
It's better for the integrity of the line to have a clean out brought to an empty lot, but a homeowner can't opt to have the clean out brought to the house but not hook up. I'm not totally sure I understand the question.
Yeah, the way I read it, George, is that it's DPW's policy to install that clean out as opposed to the homeowner's choice.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
So when the trunk sewer is constructed through the project area, every lot is going to get a clean out.
Yes, that's right. And that's our policy. But I guess maybe I wasn't articulating this real well, but the reason that's a little better for the integrity of the pipe is because you can get a fitting at the time of installation, you can get a fitting for that, what's called a lateral, that's going to go off to that private property. And so that's all part of that. It's like it's a Y-shaped or a T-shaped connection. That's part of the pipe when you assemble it. If you were to put it in and you didn't put that lateral connection in, and then someone would have to physically dig down on the pipe and cut it and to insert that T or that Y. So that's what I meant by the integrity of the line is a little better when you're putting all that in, and that's why it's DPW's policy to put that in at the time of the construction.
So I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
And it sounds like a good idea to put the clean out at each location. And like you said, at least you wouldn't have to dig down later to put one in to hook it up if someone decided to build. But if there's an existing home and there's a clean out that goes to that house, they're required to hook up to it. They can't opt and say, well, I don't want to do it now, but I'll do it later. I mean, not in the 9 months. I mean, like in 5 years or something.
That's correct. There are some circumstances where you can get an extension on the connection, but that is related to if you recently purchased and if you recently installed a septic system or a BAT system. Other than that, you would have to hook up within the 9-month period.
Okay, so what is the deferment if you have a brand new BAT system?
So if you get an extension on the connection time frame, that doesn't change your assessment. It just means you don't have to connect. You wouldn't have to connect within the 9 months, and so you wouldn't have to do the on-site connection work and pay a capital facility connection charge. But the assessment would still be would still go ahead on the property. So in that instance, so you would still be eligible for a partial deferment on the assessment, right? But if let's say you just put in a new septic system, you could probably get there's a procedure for that, but that's what is looked at when you're requesting an extension to the connection requirement.
Okay, but everyone still so let's say that's the situation. Someone has a brand new septic system and wants to wait. The sewer line gets brought in. There's a clean out put up to that property. So even though that owner would not be hooking up to the sewer line at that time, they would still just and they would start to make the payment on the assessment over the 40
Yes.
years.
That's right. That's correct.
Oh,
Everybody would be paying the assessment. Yeah. Yeah.
and how much was that per home or per lot?
I mean, from our preliminary estimate, Ed, do you have that one?
Because I'm sorry to interrupt, because that the assessment for everyone in the neighborhood would be exactly the same, right? Whereas
Yes.
each individual, whatever they have to do to get it from the street to their house, whether it's a long way, a short way, whether,
Yeah.
that'll vary, but the actual assessment for everyone in the neighborhood would be exactly the same.
Yeah, that's correct. It's divided by the total number of properties in the project. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. And have a good evening. Thanks for joining us and sticking with us for this presentation.